Welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan, host of the show, where I featured inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their stories and successes. Today's podcast is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a leading digital advertising agency which helps their clients attract new customers, grow existing accounts, and ultimately help them grow their profitability and earnings. Spinutech, thank you so much for your sponsorship today. Well, our guest today is Jon Morris. Jon is the founder and CEO of Ramsay Innovations. As the CEO of Ramsay Innovations, Jon is dedicated to helping marketing agencies quickly scale their growth through solid financial education, awareness, accuracy, and acumen to make the right data-driven decisions for better performance and outcomes. Jon has had an entrepreneurial career, and we'll learn some of the lessons of what he did not work out so well and how he turned a $10,000 investment in one of the largest independent digital agencies. Jon's going to share his growth story and journey, and we're going to learn from successes that he's experienced. Jon, welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast.
Kevin, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Jon. So if you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, maybe what you want to do when you grow up and be in the big business world.
Yep. So grew up in Chicago, went to a small school for undergrad called Kenyon College, went to business school at University of Chicago, which is actually where my last agency, Rise Interactive, was funded. And I've been really in the agency space since the mid-1990s. And even in today's business, where it's a fintech company, it's selling to marketing agencies. So still very well deep in the world of the agency world.
So born and raised in Chicago, educated in Chicago, businesses in Chicago.
Yeah.
When you're growing up as a youngster, Jon, what did you want to do when you grew up?
So it's funny. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. My parents both owned other businesses. My grandpa owned her own business. My grandpa owned his own business. So I didn't really know what type of business I wanted to own. I just knew that I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And, that there's something really cool and special about taking something small and turning it into something big and special. And so I've stuck to that, and I'm doing it today.
So you ended up, starting some entrepreneurial ventures into the advertising space. Did you do anything prior to that, or did you go right into advertising?
So in 1996, which is when I graduated from college, I applied to all the major consulting firms at that time period. And I made it to the final interview of every single major consulting firm, and I got rejected by every single major consulting firm. So I'm 22 years old. I'm just graduating college, and I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't get a job.
Right.
So I decided to create a computer company. I actually didn't know anything about computers. I just was nerdy enough that people thought that I knew something about computers.
Right.
And that computer company turned into a web development company, which morphed into a digital marketing company. And so I literally spent one day moving from after graduating, and then the next day started my computer company. I kind of find it funny, but I got as a graduation gift a briefcase.
Yeah.
And I would walk around to sales pitches with the book HTML for Dummies in the briefcase. So that's what I was reading at the time.
Right. Oh, that's too funny. That's a great story.
Yeah.
So Jon, that computer business ended up becoming a digital advertising. You've had two businesses that I'm more of in the digital advertising space. One that worked out amazing, and then one that didn't work out so well. Can you tell us a little bit more about your first agency?
Yeah, so that's the one I was telling you about. It was called Net Traffic. I started it right after college. And there were a few things that were working against me. So the first is I had this whole vision of data-driven digital marketing in the mid-1990s. The reality is there just wasn't that many places to advertise that were data-driven.
Right.
Google didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. Yahoo was the 800-pound gorilla. AOL was ridiculous in terms of what they were selling advertising for. So part of it was just I was a little premature to the market, but I still grew the company over about 5 or 6 years. I grew to about 10 to 15 people or so. But ultimately, it ended up when the dot-com crash happened in 2000, 2001, I lost 80% of my revenue in 1 month and ended up closing the doors down.
Yeah.
And, my learnings from that were a couple things. One, just one learning in general is look inward. I spent many, many years blaming the dot-com crash for my failures of running that agency.
Yep.
And I can tell you, there were plenty of digital agencies that made it out of that time period. So when you recognize that other digital agencies were doing well, you have to look inward.
Right. Interesting story. John, I heard a statistic back on your, blaming the .com. I heard a statistic that 98% of the digital companies in business before year 2000 are no longer in business today. And so at the end of the day, only 2% survived. So if that helps you from any condolences perspective, I had a similar journey when, the .com bubble burst as well. We went from about 225 people down to about 15 people in about 7 months. And so we watched 80% of our business disappear. But the learning lesson for me too is that the people the clients that did survive that were the companies I sold original websites to for $500 or $5,000 or $700. The ones that didn't survive were the companies coming to my doorstep with $250,000 of someone else's money saying, we need this new website built in 2 months. And we've got this crazy, great idea that ended up being a crazy idea that didn't turn out to be great. And their investors all ran from them. And so I think my learning lesson too about, look internal and stuff like this, I think is just understanding a little bit about, who your customers are and what their ability is to see their vision through and who controls capital and things of that nature. When you watch 80% of your clients go away in about a 90-day window because all of their funding dried up and no one was confident putting more capital in there, that was a big learning lesson for me and sounds like the same to you.
It is who your clients are really matters.
Yeah. Yep. And unfortunately, a lot of those people I really enjoyed the relationship with. They did seem to have some interesting ideas at the time, but they didn't control their own destiny. They were too reliant on a third party to be able to fund the transaction all the way through. And the majority of times when the dot-com bubble burst, everybody with the capital just scattered. And so that's where we saw, so many companies like yours, and mine, see significant declines in the people that we worked with and the number of companies that we served.
Yeah.
So you had this experience, but you decided to do it all over again. What motivated you to want to try this a second time?
So I actually did not want to do it all over again. I went to
but you did.
School. I did. So I'll explain how that happened. I went to business school at University of Chicago with the very specific focus of switching my careers from marketing to finance.
Okay.
So I got an MBA with a concentration in finance and entrepreneurship.
Nice.
And my best friend was a mutual fund manager that was doing incredibly well. I grew up with him. We always loved doing the same thing. So I assumed that I would love doing this since he seemed to love doing it. And I got an internship and I was bored out of my mind.
Wow.
And I kept on interviewing, CEOs and CFOs to determine if I was going to invest in their company. And I was like, I want their job. I don't want my job.
Right.
So a whole big reason why I went to get a degree at University of Chicago was proved to be the wrong reason to go.
Sure.
The second thing that happened is one of my closest friends from business school wanted to enter University of Chicago's New Venture Challenge, which is an annual business plan competition.
Yep.
And I had no interest in starting a business. I just wanted to win the competition. And the original idea of Rise Interactive was to teach digital marketing to small businesses. And my idea was to put on, 2-day conferences and have, online content that you'd have access to. And so what ended up happening is I took second place in the competition.
Wow.
And then I had a line of, venture capitalists and seasoned entrepreneurs who believed in me and thought I had something there.
Yes.
So it made me pause and be like, well, maybe I should keep doing this, given
Right.
that they believed in me. So it wasn't like I was like, I'm going to go start another agency. It was I set out to win a competition, and then when I did well in the competition, I decided to keep going.
And it's interesting, John, we have so many people, guests on our Growth Fire podcast. The company that, is the company that we're going to talk about on, their journey of growth. So too often, the opportunity of how they started that company wasn't by design. It was very opportunistic. It wasn't like they knew that's what they were going to do. It's just that they were at a juncture of their experience, and a door that they weren't expecting to opened up. And, they thought about what this new opportunity would be, and they were going in a different direction. But I think some of the messaging that we hear from people in their journey of growth is always be aware of new opportunities. And while you want to be focused on maybe one that you have, sometimes the best one isn't the one that you were thinking about. It's a new one that may open up on a different path. And all too often we're hearing, prior guests talk about their journey that they're on today was not by design. It was just opportunistic in the journey. And it sounds like yours was one of those that you just wanted to win a contest, but ended up becoming the source of your next agency. Let's learn more about that.
Yeah. So Rise Interactive, as I said, originally started with 2-day seminars. And I was doing these 2-day seminars, and someone kept on saying, well, couldn't you just do this for me? And I decided that was a better business model. And I liked the idea of reoccurring revenue.
Right.
And so I switched more to focusing on being an agency, and started out with our very first customer at $50 a month.
Yeah.
And, by the end, I think our average order value was like $700,000 a year, not a month. I wish it was.
Right.
And so, we kept on scaling and growing the business over a 16-year time period. And, when I really think about the success of Rise, I think there were 3 things that worked in our favor. The first one is, at this time period, over many, many years, a lot of money was leaving traditional advertising and moving to digital advertising.
Yes. Yep.
So part of it was I was just in the right category in the right space at the right time.
Sure. Did you know that at the time, or just that was something you were realizing?
No, I was very cognizant of that. I have a line that I like to use, which is, you can't fight the wind.
Right.
And if you are in an industry with wind at your back, you're going to do incredibly well. And if you're in an industry where you have a headwind, I don't care how smart you are. I can't tell you how many people I've seen who are considered brilliant business leaders buy newspapers only to find out that it's really hard to run a newspaper when circulation keeps on decreasing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So well spoken. Yeah.
And then the second one was, we were probably one of the very first people to really talk about data-driven marketing.
Okay.
And so we had a unique point of view at that moment in time, in terms of, the way we organized data, the way that we were coming up with insights, the way we were able to answer questions. Nobody was able to come close to us for many, many years. I still think to this day, Rise has the best levels of insights and in-depth analysis.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is, I took a lot of the learnings from my mistakes in the first agency, and I just think I ran the business, and executed really well. And I think those were kind of the 3 elements that kind of took us to that path.
So that's interesting. So, my next question is kind of maybe related to that last point that you just brought, your third point there. But, what was it that you're using, John, that you're checking yourself, that you're on the right path versus maybe ended up being in the same outcome that you had the first time?
So when I was in business school, one of my professors had a comment to me that resonated incredibly well. And it was, the only thing worse than going bankrupt is being a business of the living dead, which is that you make just enough money to never make any money.
Wow.
And so in the early years, I was really cognizant of the opportunity cost.
Yep.
And what was, all my friends started off graduating from University of Chicago with these high-paying jobs, and I didn't have that high-paying job.
Right.
So I had benchmarks that I had to hit in order for me to continue to go, to make me feel good that I was eventually going to surpass the opportunity cost.
And did you keep yourself honest with those benchmarks that you were checking, and where you're?
Luckily, I did really well.
Good.
So I never had to, you know what I'm saying? Like I never had to sit there and like fudge the numbers and be like,
Right.
well, I didn't hit the numbers. Like I did really well and I exceeded the numbers in terms of those benchmark numbers.
Right.
But I will tell you that my parents and grandma did hold an intervention, and they invited me out to dinner, and more my dad and my grandma, they like ganged up on me about like what a mistake I'm doing. I shouldn't start this company. You know, this is your opportunity to get a job.
Right.
So I'm glad I didn't listen to them because it did work out. But, you know, that was something I was very cognizant of. But, you know,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I'll give you an example of one of the things that I did really differently this time is if you think about your first 10 employees, I was absolutely determined to make sure that they were the best of the best based on what I could afford.
Okay.
And I had a very clear vision in my head of what I wanted for each person and the role and what I was hiring for. And I created an incredibly rigorous interview process. And I also found that, you know, a lot of people were really good at duping me in the interview process. And so in 2006, I started the company in 2004. I fired 50% of the people I hired.
Wow.
And the reason why is because I was looking for a very specific analytical person. And I knew that my first 10 people, I couldn't afford mistakes. Like they had to be amazing. And eventually I created an analytics exam because what I was interviewing for was people to be analytical. And what I found is that if you ask questions, you know, a lot of people can pretend to be analytical.
Sure.
But when I created the analytics exam, it had a 22% pass rate. There was no fooling me. You know, I had now to make decisions. And that was a big impetus is the quality of our hires were just phenomenal.
You kind of answered one of the questions I had, but you know, if you were trying to get the top 10, the first 10 to be just the perfect match, and you know you were winning one of every two of those, so to speak. How did you get better at hiring? And it sounds like you created this test.
Yeah, and I'm not positive, but I will say I'm 90% confident that Rise uses some version of that test today.
Wow, that's great. That's great. John, you know, they always say turnover is costly. How did that affect the other team members around you that were watching people come in and then not being able to stay with the company long? How did that help? How did that help or harm the culture?
In terms of the leaders that were in place, they were lockstep with me. You know, I'm a big sports guy, and you know, I can't tell you how many times, you know, I hear people complain about like, why don't they fire that quarterback, or why don't they, you know, hire that person, and you know, and then you look within and they don't make any of the tough decisions themselves.
Sure.
And so, you know, I would say that for the most part, I think we had a really strong culture. I think people always believed in the vision of what they're going, and they understood it was a performance-based culture.
Sure.
And I was not shy about you're coming into a place that's a performance-based culture.
Yeah. And so the expectation was set there, and you know, they saw then too that you created this test and were trying to become better as well.
Yeah.
And it only made their job probably lighter. If you had the highest quality you could afford, it only made their job probably easier than they were trying to cover for somebody who couldn't carry their weight, so to speak.
Yeah. And, you know, just to give an example, Scott Conine, who became the chief operating officer of the company, he was the first employee that I hired. And there was like a senior person that I saw has upward potential. And I interviewed him. He was working, you know, he was interviewing in my 1,300 square foot condo in this tiny little office.
Yeah.
And, you know, I told him on day one, I was like, look, my goal is to build the largest independent digital agency. That was my goal. And, you know, everyone knew that literally from when I had one person to 10 people to 100 people to, you know, a couple of hundred people. And so part of the way that I believe that we were going to get there was through ensuring that we had the most talented people possible.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. It's great vision.
Yeah.
So, John, you eventually had an exit with Rise, and now you're at it again with Ramsay Innovations. What made you start this company?
So similar to me wanting to win a competition, I was not necessarily looking to start a business right away. I told my company at Rise that I was going to step down as CEO on March 2nd, 2020. 10 days later, we went to work from home due to the pandemic.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then April 1, I was no longer CEO. And so after 16 years of being a CEO, and I can tell you have all these dreams of what you're going to do when you sell a large company.
Right.
They generally involve the airport being open, and if you play golf, the golf course being open. I actually don't play golf, but I like the metaphor. At that time, the golf courses were closed, the airports were closed. We were wiping down our groceries, and I had 6, 8, and 10-year-old in my house.
Oh.
And so I was like, well, I got to do something with my time.
Right.
Started Ramsay much sooner than I anticipated. What stuck with me is we had an executive coach at Rise. And over a 2 to 3 year period, we would meet with him every 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And every 3 months, he kept on saying the same thing to me. I've never seen financials like you guys have. The insights you have, nobody else has. And he kept on saying, he's like, it's a business within itself.
Wow.
And so after you hear that every 3 months for multiple years, and then you're stuck in the middle of a pandemic at a house with a 6, 8, and 10-year-old, and you're trying to think about what you're doing next, like maybe there's something to this.
Right.
And so I decided, it started off with executive coaching with a heavy bent on this financial aspect. And then it eventually morphed, going back to your previous conversation, to just focusing on financial management, to then focusing on financial management for agencies, to now we are a software company or a fintech company that provides really financial decision-making for marketing communications firms.
That's amazing. And what a journey. And again, part of your background here is you weren't seeking this wasn't a vision you had, but you were seeking an opportunity to deal with circumstances and you found this opportunity, dealing with just sold my business, but thought I'd be able to go enjoy myself. But COVID has everything closed and I've got kids in the house. It's just so interesting how often we find like the opportunity we weren't thinking is the opportunity that ends up becoming, the next thing we invest a lot of our time and resources into, and it works out. And so again, the message there is just always be open-minded to being more sensitive around what's in your environment and just look to potentially other things to do besides the one that you're doing. And sometimes that's what you might chase after.
Yeah.
John, as a relatively young company, I'm sure you have goals of growth. Can you tell us what's been effective over the last year or so from a sales and marketing perspective to generate new clients?
Absolutely. So right now, we are trying to get clients to sign up for our software. And what we have found is really impactful is we're offering free 15-person agency networking events. Okay. And the pitch is not come learn about our software. We literally only talk about our software for 5 to 10 minutes. But when they get into those events and we share the benchmark numbers and we share some of the things that are really important, we're getting about 50% of the people who attend those events to sign up for our software.
Wow, that's strong.
Yeah. So it's and then the other part is you're building a community along the way, which I actually really enjoy. I love getting to connect and meet other agency owners.
Right.
So it's been a pretty powerful method for us to acquire customers.
In your sales and marketing today, are there any key performance indicators that you pay extra special attention to on the good or the bad side? Absolutely.
And I do this at Rise and I do it at Ramsay. So the first thing is, I'm just going to give a few definitions. So the first is this concept of what is an opportunity? And when I say an opportunity, it's got to meet 4 criteria. And it's an acronym that says BANT.
Okay.
So the first thing is the prospect that you're talking to has to have the budget to afford your services.
Sure.
The second one is you have to be talking to a decision maker, so authority. The third is that you vetted out that there's truly a need for your services.
Yep.
And then the fourth one is that they're looking to make a decision in a timely manner.
And good.
And so I analyze how many BANT opportunities we get every single month. And every month I do cohort analysis. So it's not just how many BANT opportunities did I get, but then I track over the next 30 to 60 days, how many of those I win and how many of those I lose.
Okay, great.
And so I happen to know, our win rate is around 81% right now for this year. So
That's
it's
strong.
off the roof. Last year was in the 60s.
Yeah, it's huge.
And by doing this every single month, you are able to determine what is the volume of opportunities you get. And what you'll generally find is that a pattern will emerge fairly quickly if this is the volume you tend to get every month. Then you get to understand your win rate.
Right.
My current scenario, I only have one average order value. But when I did this at Rise, we would track not just how many we won, but what was the size that we were winning. So you could get an idea of, what your average order value was. But then, are you going to win a monster client?
Right.
How frequently do you win a monster client? So that's a huge one. The second one that we analyze is free trials to paid conversion. So in the world of SaaS, we have a 30-day free trial. And the average that you're supposed to get is around 15%. We're at 62.5% right now, converting from free trials to paid conversion.
That's huge. Yeah, that's great.
It tells me that we're doing something right. It makes me feel really good about the numbers at the moment.
Yeah, that close rate, 60. Yeah, that's huge. Jon, 2 more questions for you. The first one, have you ever had any mentor or mentors in your career? And what did you learn from them?
So absolutely. I believe this is actually really, really important. So Jack Kraft was my mentor for pretty much the vast majority of my agency career. He's the former vice chairman and chief operating officer of Leo Burnett. Okay. One of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet. And a lot of the things that I preach today, I learned from him. In my current business, there's a person named Jim Bauman, who is the chairman of the company, and he was the CEO of a company called Fiscal Advocate, which I guarantee you 99% of your audience has never heard of. Follett, he turned from 500 million to 1.2 billion under his reign as CEO. And it's the single largest white labeled or private bookstore company.
Wow.
So what they do is they have 1,200 universities and colleges where they private label the bookstores. So for example, Stanford University's bookstore or Baylor University's bookstore are all Follett bookstores.
Right. Wow. That's fantastic. And so these people are just helpful in helping you find your own way. And any tidbits you want to share of what they did for you that was extra special in guiding you in your journey?
Yeah. So since we're talking about agencies, I'll talk about some of the things that Jack will bring up. So the first thing is the Leo Burnett model when he was on the leadership team there was to have 50 amazing customers. Mm-hmm. And when you would win a customer, you would sunset a customer. Mm-hmm. And so his customers are like Procter and Gamble and McDonald's and, huge brands.
Right.
But we emulated that model, and so when I left Rise, we only had 60 customers, but they were becoming larger and more substantial customers.
Sure.
The second thing was, one of the most important things is your org structure. And he really helped me understand, what's the right org structure? What are the right roles? We had a 4-to-1 management to direct report structure that he helped us put in place. And so I think those will be 2 things I think will be really valuable for your audience to think about.
And that 4-to-1, that's a really, that's a great ratio.
Yeah.
Well, Jon, thank you so much. We've been talking to Jon Morris, founder and CEO of Ramsay Innovations. Jon, if anyone wants to connect with you after they hear or watch this podcast, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So there's a few ways. One, every day I post on LinkedIn something about growing your agency. So follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. The second one is you can always go to ramsayinnovations.com to learn more about our technology engine and how it can help give you insights to make better decisions. And then the third thing is we have a Facebook community called the Virtual Agency Community on Facebook. And so if you search that up, it's a private group, but I will give access to any agency owner or anyone out there who wants to help agency owners grow.
No, that's great, Jon. Jon, thank you so much for being a guest on the Growth Fire podcast. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your insights, and we wish you ongoing success with your journey.
Kevin, loved being on here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.